The dominoes have started to fall. Celtics first doing some holiday shopping a day before the draft. Last night, the team trading Jrue Holiday to the Trailblazers for shooting guard Trenni Simons and 2 future second-round picks. That was just the first shoe to drop. We have breaking news. The Celtics have traded Kristaps Porzingis in a 3-way deal involving the Nets and the Hawks. Porzingis is headed to Atlanta, while the C's will get Georges Niang in a second-round pick. The C's have now saved a total of $180 million in luxury taxes and are now $4.5 million below the second apron. The first round of the NBA draft is Wednesday night, so will Brad Stevens make a trade to move up? We will have coverage of that tomorrow. We'll see what other moves he makes. Welcome into our Bella Early Edition. Trenni Casey alongside Phil Perry, Kayla Burton, and Chris Forsberg. Chris, just first and foremost, your reaction to the Porzingis trade. We've had a little time to, I think, marinate on Jrue Holiday and what that means, but now you have no Jrue Holiday, no Kristaps Porzingis. We all thought it was a possibility, but that came very quickly.
Yeah, we were walked away from last night saying, man, okay, that's the first domino. What comes next? Because they only shed $4.7 million off their books from the Trenni Simons move. Well, here's the other part of it now. With Kristaps going out and taking back limited return, the Celtics save $22 million. Now you're below the second apron. Don't get excited. It doesn't create enough space to necessarily go out there and start moving pieces, but you do loosen some of the restrictions that are on your team at the moment. Maybe that opens pathways as they further craft this roster. I don't think this is the last move they're going to make. I think there are other shoes that are going to drop. You need to fill out your entire front court. But even when they brought in Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, guys, we all knew this was going to be a 2-year run, that it was unlikely that these guys were going to be long-term. It's jarring now because this championship core is being broken apart in the span of 24 hours. But the Celtics have set themselves up with some pathways now to move forward, and there are still tough decisions to make. But hey, they got to the money point that they need to get to. Now we see what there's a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th shoe to drop.
Yeah, this looks like a salary dump, right? I mean, that's essentially what it is, and it's what makes this Porzingis trade really interesting to me as compared to the Holiday trade, where the Holiday trade, again, you're trying to shed salary, but you got a player back who's really a starting caliber NBA player and might, based on shooting alone, if you end up trading Sam Hauser, who we know is a pretty good shooter, he might be your best shooter next year if he's on the roster. This Porzingis trade, Kayla, you got really nothing back. All due respect to Georges Niang. He's probably not going to be a factor for you next year. You got a second-round pick, which I understand has some value, but that's not helping you this year. It's probably not helping you next year. So it's an interesting way in which that Brad Stevens, I think, has just given himself more flexibility to move pieces around eventually here and obviously get under that second apron, which is critical to them.
Yeah, I mean, Brad Stevens and this front office, they did what they had to do, right? They needed, the priority was to get under that second apron, and they did that. And we talked about, and even when Kristaps Porzingis helped lead this team, even though he wasn't really fully available in the first postseason in that championship title, he still was a contributor, obviously, throughout that regular season, including last year. But to Phil's point, Niang has only averaged, 9 points per game, a little over 3 rebounds per game. So the concern here, if you're looking at this specific team going into this year, is who's going to be the center? Is it going to be Luke Cornett? Is it Al Horford? You look at, and Chris and I were talking about this, Neemias Queta. Those are your big guys right now. And that, to me, sounds a little shaky because you have Al Horford, who is 39 years old at this point, and Luke Cornett has had a tremendous improving season. But is it sustainable? That's going to be the big question, but it's very clear that Brad Stevens and the Celtics just needed to do what they needed to do financially.
Well, and also they're only $4.5 million under the second apron right now. So if, let's just say, Luke Cornett's market has gone up, he may not be affordable for this team to bring back, and that may not be who they want to build around. We've talked a lot, Chris, about whether or not this team, what is the long-term goals with all of these different moves? It has to be more than just getting under the second apron. You have to build something that, when Jason Tatum comes back, you can be a championship-level team again. Do you think there will be more moves, and do more moves maybe signal, I don't want to say tanking next year, but taking a step back to figure out what you have before you move forward?
I think they're getting their books in order, but creating flexibility with where it goes from here. So, okay, let's say that now that they've moved Porzingis, they've gotten to the money they need to get to. Even if there's other moves, if Sam Hauser goes out, if they trim on the back end of the roster, just create a little bit more money and bring back some of those role players, you can maybe take a flyer on Simons to start the year. Is he someone that fits your long-term future? Can he show he can be a good enough defender to be part of this team? Is he a piece that complements the core you've got here? The bigger question is, of course, okay, does this absolve? Are we going to end the trade talks about Jaylen Brown and Derek White and bigger splashes? I think they still have to listen and try to process where this goes. But that's an avenue, right? Like, okay, do they want to kind of completely hit the reboot button here and add draft picks and add young players and put themselves in a position where Tatum's the only bulky salary by the time he comes back? That's an option. Or it might be, hey, we're going to see how Jaylen does in the 1A role next year, and then we're just going to try and get one more piece. And maybe that's Simons, maybe that's someone else, and then you kind of figure it out from there. They've figured out the money stuff right now, and again, there's still some tweaks to go. But the bigger picture is they've got to decide what track is next, and I just think they like getting off of Holiday's money and now getting off of Porzingis' money created a lot of flexibility.
Phil, what track do you think is the best one? Taking the emotion out of it and how much you like the guys and you want the team to win, what is the best track?
The best track is to make the moves you need to make in order to be the best team you can be 2 seasons from now, not next season. And I think this trade is indicative of the fact that that's sort of how Stevens is looking at it. Haven't talked to the guy, can't read his mind, but when you're dealing away Kristaps Porzingis, we talked to Jeff Goodman earlier tonight who said, hey, his value is at an all-time low. Like, maybe bring him back for next year. Yes, if you were able to move him, you get under that second apron, and that has value. It also might have value to keep him around, to try to contend in what looks like a wide-open East. And if he's the old, healthy Kristaps Porzingis, if you really feel like you got to move him eventually, during the season, you could do that and get much more in terms of the value, because the last time we saw this guy, he looked like a shell of himself. So they opted not to do that. They are opting not to push the envelope in 2025, 2026 to try to contend in what looks like, again, a wide open Eastern Conference right now in order to get their books in order, to build and to make themselves better for when Jason Tatum returns. And that, to me, if that's what they're doing, is the correct approach.
Do you agree? Is that the correct approach? Or do you, especially with maybe if you bring back some young guys, have to build a winning culture and try to do that with Jaylen Brown?
Yeah, I still think that this is not a year they specifically punt on. I stand by that. And the only reason why I say that is because I believe that Jaylen Brown and Derek White, they will be here. I have no inside source on that. I don't know. But I just think that they're not going to completely punt away the season. Mind you, I don't know, Brad Stevens, he could drop a bomb in like he did with Kristaps Porzingis and continue to do it with Jaylen Brown and send him away. We don't know. But I don't think that – I think they are filling voids right now and are waiting for Jason Tatum to get back. And then they have all this draft capital. They also have they got under that second apron. And now they're able to have that flexibility that Chris was talking about and not have to worry about it with a Kristaps Porzingis who has had 2 consecutive postseasons of not really being present.
And just for an example, like, okay, now that you can aggregate contracts, remember, you're signaling that if you do start aggregating guys, you are hard capped. You cannot go back over that second apron at any point during next season. But you could take a Sam Hauser and some spare parts at the end and cobble together a $14 million roster spot, or go get somebody that you like that maybe made more money than Hauser, that you couldn't do a 1-for-1 and take back more salary. It's all about getting pathways to get the guys that you really want. And that might not happen immediately. It might be further down the road, but I do think there's options here. And just as you guys said, like, the big thing for me with Porzingis was you couldn't take the risk that he goes and plays for Latvia this year and still looks like a shell of himself, and his value completely drops off, and now you got to eat that money. They've gotten off the money now. There's a pathway forward. It hurts to see these guys leave. It hurts to see this championship core dismantled. But we all knew this was probably more likely than not.
Getting buried in all of this is that the Celtics did get a decent shooter in Anthony Simons. But do the Kristaps Porzingis move, does it make it more or less likely, Chris, that he ends up staying on this roster?
Yeah, I think it makes it more likely that you at least take a look at him. I still think he's going to be a guy that if you just get him in here and you're like, he just doesn't play defense to a level that Joe Mazzulla can confidently lean on him, that he's a starter caliber player at the $26 million number or whatever it's going to cost to extend him long term, I think then you maybe look at the deadline. It's really easy to move a guy who is in the final year of his deal, who has scoring talents, to a contender at the deadline. And especially when they know that you don't have to do it, right? Like, you've got your books in order. You're not stressing to make that move. So maybe you build him up a little bit, allow him to fill some of that scoring void without Tatum, and then kind of make a decision down the road.
You have options, right? They just went ahead and traded early a guy who's on an expiring contract in Kristaps Porzingis. They could have waited on both and said, we'll get way under next year, we'll be able to build, and Jason Tatum's coming back, and we like our outlook that way. And they opted to move Porzingis now. So they could certainly do the same thing with Simons if they feel like it gives them more options. And I want Brad Stevens to have options. I don't want the only method for Stevens to build up this roster is to be through late first-round picks and a massive second-round picks, because it's not possible. It shouldn't be the expectation that you can build a good team that way. Trenni, he's probably the second most important person in the organization after Jason Tatum right now. I want him to be able to flex his general manager muscles in any way he sees fit to make this team better moving forward. And you had to get under the second apron.
Which is why they are probably taking calls and at the very least listening on Jaylen Brown and Derek White, because that would give them draft flexibility. They've been so good for so long that, much like the other team that plays at the Garden, they do not have a lot of assets. All right, well, the first round of the NBA draft is Wednesday night. So will Brad Stevens make a trade to move up? We're going to have complete coverage on NBC Sports Boston and our YouTube channel starting at 8 p.m.